Okay, I think we can start. Happy holidays, everyone. Welcome, welcome. I'm Mimi Doe. I'm co-founder with Dr. Michele Hernandez of Top Tier Admissions. I'm CEO. I don't know who I am, but it is the holiday season, and here we are having our little fireside chat with you. So welcome, and let me pass this to Michele to introduce herself, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, happy holidays, everyone. Dr. Michele Hernandez, co-founder along with Mimi of Top Tier Admissions, Chief Experience Officer, outward and inward facing for talking to all parents and students and all of that. But we're happy to have this opportunity to go over some kind of basics that we've already had a lot of questions on, and then we're going to leave plenty of time at the end for any of your questions. You can just drop questions in the chat as we go. And at the end, we'll also let you unmute. So whatever's easier. But if you have questions with what we're talking about, literally just drop them in the chat and we'll see them and we'll try to answer them as we go. And we're going to try to keep it pretty short since we know people are busy over the holidays. We should be like 30 minutes or so, 35 minutes. So um, we'll dig in and we'll let Mimi take the beginning and we'll talk for a little bit and then we'll open it up entirely for questions.
Perfect. And if you have questions along the way, feel free, as Michele said, to send those our way so that this can be somewhat of a conversation. Again, it's the holiday season. There's a lot of excitement here at Top Tier Admissions. Michele and I started the company over 20 years ago, and this is our favorite time of year, obviously, because our students are sending us incredible videos and emails, and we're getting phone calls about early decision, early action. I got in, I'm so excited. And we're so invested in our students that this feels just very personal for us. So for those of you who are here, who have students who have applied, seniors, and are hearing news right about now, it's just such an exciting, happy time of year. College admissions changes every year. College admissions is not transparent. It's confusing. This is why we do what we do, to pull back the veil and help take the stress out of the process by informing through our blogs, through our webinars like this, working with our private counseling clients, working with our boot camp students. Really, our goal has always been, since Michele and I started Top Tier Admissions, making this process more transparent and helping students and their families understand what it is that they need to do to be high impact and to make decisions that don't close doors. And every year things change. I mean, it has really become, back in 2004, when we wrote a book together called Don't Worry, You'll Get In, our point was to write that book to help take away the stress in admissions way back when. And the stress has even gotten worse now with all of the shifts and the changes. So in this time together, we want to dispel some of those myths, and certainly talking about the trends of what's happening right now is a great place to start. So no surprise, this round of early has record high applicant numbers, increased competition yet again. So the Common App reported a 6% increase in unique applicants and a 10% rise in total applicants. So 10% more common applications than in prior years. Think about that. The Common App came around, I think, in 2007, and it's just gone up, 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 up ever since. So students are casting a wider net. They're applying to an average of 7 institutions. Competition just gets more and more intense. What is also interesting is, according to Yale Daily News, some schools did see a dip. Some highly selective schools did see a dip in applications. Notably, Yale, they were at a, let's see, I think a 16% drop in applications. I think that this is very interesting for a number of reasons. I think also Williams had a drop in their early applicants. 14, let me correct myself. Yale had a 14% decrease in applications. And Williams and Brown were down slightly in the early round. I think that the reason here is that applications soared when colleges went score optional. That's when it really, everybody threw in an application to Yale, to Brown, to Williams, some of the top schools. They figured, you know what? I have a shot. If they're not looking at my scores, I'm going to go ahead and submit an application. Well, now that it's clear that standardized tests do matter and do help predict the success of the freshman class, colleges are going back to wanting scores, and applications to those very competitive colleges, those three in particular, are going down. Another interesting trend in this early round is that first generation and low income students are a growing presence. So the Common App highlighted a 19% increase in first generation applicants. These applicants get a tag in admissions, meaning colleges are looking for kids whose parents did not attend college. And those students are getting the message that their application is wanted, that they should apply. There's a 13% rise in fee waiver eligible students. So more and more underserved students are applying to college. This is interesting. Institutions have to ensure a robust support system for these students when they're accepted, and they're all stepping up. It started during COVID, and that increases from pre-college programming to on-campus resources, fly-in programs for applicants. Another interesting trend is regional growth. I'm sure you all have followed our blog. I hope so. We try to put this information in the blog as it happens, but the Southwest emerges as a hotspot. 29% applications surged in the Southwest by 29% in the early round. UT Austin, I spend half the year in Austin, and boy, I'll tell you, their applications just soared. West Virginia College has soared it showed increased demand. Certain countries are sending more and more applicants in this round. Bangladesh up 51%. Who knew? So very interesting. Again, another trend I spoke to a minute ago is that there is a renewed interest in test scores. Colleges care about seeing standardized tests. If you've worked with us, if you've read our blog post all along, we have encouraged our students to prep for and take standardized tests because of the increased applications. What is a differentiator, especially when there's grade inflation, which is another trend. High schools not wanting to cause stress for students have been inflating those A-level grades. Public universities gain favor. The applications to public universities grew 12%, grew faster than applications to private universities. Affordability is an issue. And the UC system remained score choice, no scores. You don't need to send scores to UC schools. So that is definitely going to draw more applicants. Let's see, Michele, what am I missing for trends?
I mean, just like Questbridge, which is like an organization that, because remember, the Supreme Court got rid of using race as a factor in admissions, but then unfortunately numbers plummeted for Black and Hispanic students. So colleges are making up for that by taking a really high number of Questbridge students. Those are not all minority students, but they're all low income students who go through this program from, middle school, high school onwards, and they get kind of guaranteed admission. So Princeton just announced it took more Questbridge students than ever before in its class. So they're kind of locking in some amount of diversity, not just racial diversity, but socioeconomic diversity by taking these Questbridge kids. But it makes it much harder for everyone else, because even in the early round, Princeton this year rejected quite a lot of kids. And that's because I think they took so many Questbridge kids.
I think let's all, good point. Thank you for that. And legacy and development cases, let's talk about that for a minute. If you read the news about college admissions, and of course we do, we're very interested in the news, and we also are hearing from admissions offices directly, but there's a lawsuit out now. So some schools are having to disclose how many cases that the Board of Trustees walked through the school. There's some interesting data that came out today from Harvard. So you can also see from the news that a lot of schools are saying, look, we're dropping legacy. And to be clear, legacy means that an applicant's mom or dad, one of their parents, had attended and graduated from that institution, not grandparents typically, not siblings typically, but parents. So many schools are saying, look, we don't do that anymore. That's privilege. We're not doing that. We're stating we're not doing that. Development means that your parent or your grandparent or has given a building, is building a building, and some institutional level of giving has marked them and tagged them as being hooked, like a recruited athlete. And so this kind of privilege is coming under fire. It's an interesting development to watch, just like with affirmative action and some of the lawsuits there, where a lot of this data is now becoming transparent and, it's at the forefront of a conversation. So this is kind of a new trend and something interesting to watch. How does that relate to you as parents, as students who are thinking about applying, who are not in their senior year? It's just that legacies don't go as far. They don't have as much traction as they once did.
Great. Well, just a very quick overview. Some of you are seniors and you know this intimately. Some are younger students. So I'll just give a quick overview of some of the strategic advantage of applying early. Early comes in lots of different flavors. Some schools have early decision, which is a binding decision. So if you get accepted to an early decision school, you apply by November 1st or 15th. You hear by December 15th or so. And it's binding. So you have to say yes. You have to withdraw your other applications. In exchange for that, you get a higher acceptance rate because they can lock you in and they know that you're going to say yes. Unlike in regular, when they accept kids, they don't know if they're going to say yes. So that means their yield is more definitive. So typically the Ivies and top schools have tended to fill up 33 to 50% of the class in early, which is very, very high. The other thing to remember is that there are quite a few recruited athletes and legacies and development cases, and all those special cases, Questbridge kids also apply early. Still, we would say the advantage is much more to getting an early decision because you're in a smaller applicant pool and your application is read more carefully. I can tell you from going through many admission cycles is that everyone's fresh in the early round. So, where I worked at Dartmouth, we would typically get 3,000 to 4,000 applicants in early as opposed to, 25,000, 30,000 in regular. So there's a big difference in how kind of fresh and how many applications you have to read each day. Early decision has 2 rounds. Round 1, as I said, is November 1st. You find out around December 15th. Round 2 is if, let's say you apply to Williams and you get deferred and you're like, okay, I want another chance. I'm going to apply to Chicago ED2. Applications are due January 1st, along with the other applications, but you hear in middle February. It's like Vanderbilt, Emory. There's a lot of schools that have a second round of ED. Many liberal arts schools also have a second round of early decision. If you get in February, then you have to withdraw all your regular apps. You don't get to wait it out. But again, the payoff is that much higher acceptance rates. So we really encourage all of our kids to have an early strategy. Then there's early action. This comes in 3 different varieties, regular early action, like University of Michigan, or restrictive early action or single choice early action. That just means that if you do restrictive early action, there's a couple schools, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, most notably, that have some kind of restrictive early action. What that basically means is that you cannot do any other school unless it's a state school or an international school. So if you applied to Princeton, you're putting all your eggs in one basket. It's very hard to get in. And then if you don't get in, you're kind of thrown into the regular round, or you can do ED2. And there's a third type, but again, that's kind of a technicality, restrictive, like Georgetown, which means that you can't mix early decision with early action. So there's a couple different types of early action. Early action in general is less restrictive because you don't have to commit to the school, but the advantage isn't as big either. So we usually have our students combine these two. So for example, if their first choice, let's say for sake of argument, is Barnard in New York. Let's say this is a girl and she's applying to Barnard, which is a single-sex school, ED1, that student can also apply as kind of a backup to University of Virginia, University of Michigan, University of Chicago, which has both early action and early decision. You can apply to, Fiber, Tulane, Villanova. So let's say the student doesn't get in to Barnard, but gets into 3 of the other schools. Well, that at least tells you that, okay, that's great. I have those schools locked in, but I don't have to tell them until May. So then I can apply to regular schools also. Again, the downside of early action is that the acceptance rate isn't as high. And now a lot of the schools, instead of notifying you before January 1st, are notifying after January 1st, which is much less convenient, in my opinion. It kind of puts kids at a disadvantage. I really don't know why they don't just do it the last week of December. I understand what they're doing. They want kids who apply, let's say, and get into Barnard to withdraw their applications from the early action school, but kids don't always do that. So I think that's why kids have to wait. So there's kind of a lot of strategy. Again, ED1 increases your odds the most, and you're putting all your eggs in one basket. But then you don't get to apply in regular. But remember, in regular, at a lot of the top schools, and now I'm not just talking about the Ivies, I'm talking about the 20 top schools. A lot of them have single-digit regular acceptance rates. Like schools like Stanford have like a 1 or 2% acceptance rate in regular round. Most of the Ivies are under 3%. So when you're facing those odds, and then you're looking at 15 to 20% in early, even with some of the kids that are hooked who are mixed into early, it still pays to have a really good early strategy. And this is what we do with our students to kind of leverage as many advantages as we can get out of the early round, which includes early action, early decision round 1, early decision round 2.
We've categorized your questions. So many of you have sent questions in advance, which is why we've kind of created these categories. A lot of questions on application tips. A lot of folks are curious about, oh my gosh, what are mistakes that I should watch out for? What does this mean, demonstrated interests? And for current seniors, help, I was deferred. So some common mistakes that we've seen over the years with applications. And remember, many of our students have been working with us since their freshman year, sophomore year. So they're not going to make these mistakes because they're working with us. But we do work with students who would like to have essay guidance alone. And we really help guide those students as well to avoid these common mistakes. Things like writing an entire, essay about this profound summer experience outward bound, or the meaningful relationship with the student's grandparent who recently passed away. Essays that don't show a college what it is the student will bring to the school is a common application mistake. The other thing is students often just don't leverage the real estate on the common application, which is there to be used. One of the things we do in our boot camp and certainly with our one-on-one students is we help them utilize every inch of space to present themselves as the high impact scholars that they are. So don't forget that college is about academics. There's no hack for getting into college that bypasses being a strong scholar. So a common mistake is to think that your interview will make up for your C-level grades, for instance. And interviews won't do that. Or that there's some magic thing that you can do, like publish a self-published book, and that will help you stand out, when really you haven't found an academic interest that you have spent time fostering. So that's something for everybody listening we'd urge you to do, which is be authentic, stay true to yourself. Don't think of any fast fix. It's really much more organic than that. And follow your deep interests. That's one of the biggest mistakes that students overlook. Demonstrated interest is interesting. What does that even mean? So Michele was talking about, for instance, the early action non-binding schools like University of Michigan, University of Wisconsin, schools like Santa Clara, schools that are not binding. You apply in the early round and you don't have to tell them until you hear from your regular schools. Well, think about this. Colleges care about yield. They care about how many people will say yes once they've been given the thumbs up that they got in. And so if you've never visited the school, if you've never gone on their website and registered, if you've never done one of their virtual info sessions, you've actually shown no interest in the school other than a half-hearted application without a strong why essay. Think about it. If they have thousands of applications, and we're seeing that applications are going up to these EA, early action non-binding schools, they're going to pick a student who's shown them love. So demonstrated interest means you have to do just that. You have to go the extra mile to register with a school that you care about them. And if you were accepted, you would go to that school. Again, it's not binding, but you have to give them proof. Deferred. Okay, this is happening now. Kids who applied to Yale, let's say, didn't get in, or applied binding to Dartmouth, didn't get in. What are they going to do? They're panicked. That's rejection. Deferral is when these schools say, you know what, we're not rejecting you, but we're deferring you to the regular round. Something didn't convince us in your application. And so we're going to wait and see, I don't know, if your grades go up, if you submit a higher SAT score, if you maybe win that national contest you said you've applied for, you've entered. So if you're deferred, you have to take action. Don't just sit, cry, and wait. Yes, you want to apply to regular schools for sure, but you actually go to our website, read our deferral blog, take action. one of our private counselors who worked in the Cornell admissions office has done our deferral programs over the past few years with an astounding success rate, where she really helps students, and these are students who haven't worked with us yet, but maybe were deferred. She really does help them present a compelling, filling in the holes of what they may not have presented in the regular application they submitted in the early round.
I would also point out one last thing about that colleges now are tending not to defer as many people and just rejecting them outright. So it feels kind of it feels like you get a sting when you're not accepted, but they're kind of doing you a favor, because really among deferred kids, they only end up taking maybe 5 to 7% of deferred kids. So the odds are quite small. So I think they kind of felt like it was getting kids' hopes up, and they were doing all these things. So a lot of the top schools now just reject outright. Like Yale typically rejects now 35, 40% of the class. Okay, a couple notes on test scores and all this stuff. And I would also add that Top Tier has so many good tutors now for SAT, ACT, and also AP and IB tests. Test preparation is very important because now the things have changed. The SAT just switched over from a written test, which has been forever, to an online test. So that actually takes a little bit of different strategy and prep to prepare for it. So it's not just the content, but also the strategy. That's because when you're taking a digital test, if you make a lot of mistakes at the beginning, it actually feeds you easier questions and maxes out your score at a lower level. So you can't kind of be off point at the beginning of a test, because you'll get a lower score overall, unlike in a written test where it doesn't matter where you get the problems wrong. So test prep is even more important because you have to kind of learn how to deal with a digital test. As far as when to submit test scores, I mean, a lot of schools that were score optional now are requiring scores. So again, as Mimi said, the UCs are test blind. You can't submit scores to the UC schools, but almost all the other schools require test scores. Just check school by school, because it says it right on their admissions page. So if you're applying early, you want to submit your scores, before the deadline. So if the deadline is November 1st, you'd want to submit your scores mid-October. For regular round, you can send them in really in December. For the January 1st deadline, it usually takes somewhere like 2 to 3 weeks to get scores in. So, just do it a couple weeks in advance, but you do want to do that. Again, not that many schools are test optional. There's a lot of nuance to when you should submit scores, when not. It's not just whether they're test optional, it's how test optional are they really. So some schools have said for years they're test optional, but 80% of students who submit scores. Some schools are test optional and 10% submit scores. So you have to kind of dig out that information, which we help our students that we work with kind of find out. AP scores and IB scores are even more important now, because again, when they went test optional, kids weren't submitting SAT or ACT, and even the schools that don't require it still are happy to see AP and IB scores. We get into this argument all the time with people because a lot of high schools have sort of de-emphasized AP scores, but the problem is colleges still like to see it because they're real scores, AP and IB scores. IB scores are predicted, AP scores are actual, and you can take AP starting in 8th grade. So there definitely is an advantage to submitting your higher AP scores. You get to choose which one. So if you got a 1 on one of them and a 5 on 5 of them, you can just submit the good scores. You don't have to submit the bad scores.
So holiday time, your kids are home, you're gathered, you're celebrating holidays. It's such a special family time. And what we're hearing from you, because the questions have come in on this topic, which is stress is at an all-time high. I mean, one parent said, I have an 8th grader, a 10th grader, and a senior who hasn't heard yet, and we're about to lose our minds. As parents, I just urge you, to support your students with this high stress time of year. Help them understand that you love them no matter what happens, that you've created a plan, that you'll follow up with that plan. In the January 1st, for those applications that have to go out, set up a schedule for your student if they haven't submitted. I mean, this is honestly why Michele and I started this business 20 years ago, is to take that pressure off between parents and kids around college admissions. Let me just say that my own daughters had stress. And so Michele worked with my daughters and I worked with her kids. It's just a lot of pressure and dynamics in a relationship for your child that feels so judged by you around this topic. So times of high stress, make sure you take a time out. Use meal times that are college-free zones, that you don't talk about college admissions or you don't talk about applications. Do things like take a walk with your student and don't even bring it up. Try not to let your students see how stressed you are. I know that's hard, but you're the grown-up, so do yoga, meditate, talk to your partner, talk to your friends, vent somewhere else other than in front of your student. It's just so much for them to take in. And I think for students, what I would say, and certainly what we try to counsel the students we're working with, is if they have a strong plan and all of our students have a very clear strategy, then they should relax and trust that there are schools in that mix that are good matches for them, that both data-wise and fit-wise. So please, I beg you to use this time with your family in a way that de-emphasizes the performative sort of energy around college admissions, no matter what their ages are. Please use the time with your students to read good books. Urge that we were talking right before we hopped on this webinar, Tina and Michelle and I, about reading. We're all big readers here at Top Tier, and we urge our students to read. We create reading lists for our younger students, and Christmas, Hanukkah, winter holidays, this is a time for settling in as a family, and trying to de-emphasize all the rigor that your student is really pressured to perform for the rest of the year. I hope that helps.
I would also add to that, don't hold them to the expectations that you had when you got in, because remember, like, if most parents are somewhere around my age or a little younger, but I mean, that means that we applied to college 20 to 30 years ago. And just remember, all these schools had much higher acceptance rates. Like when I applied, to Dartmouth, I think the overall acceptance rate was closer to 25 or 30%, and now it's like 5 or 6. So like, the acceptance rates have plummeted. So it makes your kids feel under, like low self-esteem. If you're like, well, I got into Yale, you have to get into Yale. But remember, it's 20 times harder to get in now. So I think by holding that pressure to your kids that they have to get in where you went, it's, they feel it. We just know that kids feel that pressure a lot, and they kind of wish their parents would be more accepting. And oftentimes the students prefer a particular school. Like they're, dying to go to Wake Forest, and their parents are like, yeah, but you might get into Harvard, and it makes them feel bad to do that, especially when they're not really in range, or it's just so difficult they're not going to get in. You're kind of setting them up for being disappointed and then feeling like they're disappointing you, and that leads to kind of mental health crisis. Anyway, for staying on track for January deadlines, like when we work with our students, we actually do all this work over the summer. So everything's loaded into the Common App. So one tip is just, don't wait till January. Obviously, load all your essays when you get them done into the Common App, even though you don't have to hit submit until January 1st. You don't want to be writing essays, and you definitely don't want to wait till after you're deferred or rejected, because then you're depressed. That's not when you want to start writing any essays. Again, you may need additional updated letters of recommendation, especially if you have a senior year teacher in the fall who just loves you and is, thinks you're the best thing ever. You can add one letter. I wouldn't go crazy with this because colleges don't like being inundated with letters, but sometimes one additional letter from a senior year teacher, or possibly the head of school, if the head of school knows you really well, principal or head of school. As far as avoiding burnout, I mean, it's tough because senior year luckily is usually a little easier than junior year, believe it or not, because a lot of kids front load their AP scores junior year. So senior year can be a little more mellow. If you get accepted in the early round, as we tell our students, as long as you don't have any disciplinary infractions and your grades stay B level or higher, you're fine. You have to just watch out that you don't want your grades to drop to like, C's or D's or F's, because then you can actually get unaccepted. And we always tell students you have to like not have any disciplinary problems, and you can't have a dramatic drop in grades. However, you can go from A to B. You can drop some of your extracurriculars because those are less important. So, you have to kind of figure what would it do to add a little bit of extra time in your week so you can de-stress a little bit. So, for winter break, you can kind of think about your schedules and say, okay, maybe I don't need to do the spring sport that's going to be super stressful, or maybe I don't need to, be as involved in this club where I'm just peripherally involved, but I'm going to meetings every week. See if you can carve out some time, because especially senior year, you don't have to, do everything at the same 100% throttle you've been doing for 4 years. You do have to keep your grades up to sort of be and above, but you don't have to be getting A+ in every class. So that's just some tips for, how to sort of stay chill over the holiday, buy a jigsaw puzzle, read some books by the fire, just try to do some things that are, relaxing instead of just stressing all the time. So great. All right, now we'll open it up for maybe 10 minutes of questions. If you want, you can unmute if you want to. And Tina will read off some questions that we've gotten. But we'll invite anyone if anyone wants to unmute and just ask a question, anything at all. feel free. And if not, Tina will start asking some questions, but we'll give you a chance to unmute first if you want to ask one.
Sure. Well, while folks are thinking, I have a good question for both of you, and it might take a little moment for you to think of this, but we've talked about some common mistakes that students make. We've given warnings, we've given advice, but how about an example of a student success story, and what they did right in their application process? I know a lot of students' stories are fresh in our minds as we've been hearing about acceptances. So if each of you could share a story, it doesn't have to be a superstar. It could be, but someone who has an interesting application story.
Sure, I'll go first. I'll talk about one of my favorite students. Um, this is a student we worked with who started working with Top Tier in our private counseling program, the beginning of his sophomore year. He was a good student in a large public high school in the Midwest, and he liked STEM topics, but he didn't have a clear passion quite yet, other than a very empathetic student, and he cared deeply about the world. We worked with this student, and in our process of working with him, helped uncover that he cared deeply about alternative energy sources. He ended up becoming very involved in the research behind solar energy. He ended up working with a professor in his small community at a community college, helping do research in this area. He was a very shy student, and he wanted to be able to be less introverted. So he ended up taking Carnegie speech classes, and he learned to Toastmasters, and he learned to give talks, and he ended up giving a talk on the research that he had done with this professor at a conference, which was a huge personal milestone for this student and really helped him grow. He really changed his community, meaning he got involved at the community level of the small town and how they addressed solar energy in the town, and he made quite an impact. The student was happily accepted at Harvard and Stanford. He ended up going to Harvard, and he ended up literally doing at Harvard everything he said he would do at Harvard in his Why Harvard essay that he wrote with us in our private counseling program. He went on to get a PhD, and I will say that the happy story is that he is now working in a third world country, creating solar panels for major nonprofits. So this is a story where the student found his deep interest through working with us. It, yes, had a happy end product. He got into Harvard and Stanford, but more than that, he was so authentic to himself that that high impact that he created was really something that was a through line and is a through line in his professional life.
Just a quick one that where academic niche kind of matters. A student I worked with a few years ago who was very into chemistry all the time, but unfortunately he was in the Asian Indian demographic, which is very STEM heavy. So unfortunately, for when you're doing all STEM all the time and just doing all chemistry, it's very difficult to get into any of the top schools because they're overrepresented in STEM. What he was also really good at was classics, Latin and Greek. He didn't love it as much as chemistry, but he was really good at it, and he actually did kind of start to like it more. So what we did is we just developed a 3-year plan where instead of doing 100% chemistry, we divided it up. So it was roughly 50% classics, 50% chemistry. So he could continue, and he was on the Olympiad team for chemistry, but he also pursued classics, did some summer programs, did some research. And because of that and his dual interests, so he presented in his essays kind of classics forward, he ended up getting into both Yale and Stanford, which I'm 100% confident would not, and one was in regular decision, which is even more unlikely. Again, just because of the dual interest where we emphasize the humanities part, not all the STEM part. So that's another thing to remember, is that, STEM is a very saturated field, and sometimes it's easier to stand out if you do more humanities related things.
Thank you. And this is a question that gets to your years of experience and expertise, just kind of a fun question. But what is your take on college rankings, and how much attention should families and students be paying to these rankings, which have proliferated? There's many rankings one can look at nowadays. What is your opinion about these?
My first opinion is that these are just money makers for the magazines that make them. I mean, people game them all the time. And I mean, Malcolm Gladwell wrote a famous thing about rankings, and I think he actually revised it recently. But I mean, what he showed in his article was that if you change one factor in the ranking, it shuffles everything. So like, if you're like, oh, alumni donations, support for the school will count 30%. Oh, next year we change the formula, which US News does all the time, and now it's only 20%. Well, then suddenly everything shifts. Like Harvard might be number 1, then it could drop to number 10 if you just shift something slightly. And also each ranking has different things that they use in their ranking qualifications. So the Times supplement does totally different criteria than US News. But just remember, it's arbitrary. And for every parent who looks at those ratings, I wish they would actually look at what they were rating it on, because some of those things don't really matter that much. I mean, like, some things are helpful, like the percentage of alums who give money. Okay, sure, that's an interesting stat. But, sometimes it's a lot. Just remember, the number one thing is institutional reputation, which is literally a poll of college presidents saying, what do you think is the more prestigious school? And college presidents are just ranking the schools kind of haphazardly based on friends that they have who run these schools or whatever. But I mean, that's not really like a highly, precise measurement. It's sort of like people's opinions who are just, running the colleges. So I don't even know why that's included, but I'm just saying that the criteria can be weird. So I'd say, like, sure, use them as a general sense. I mean, definitely it's good to look at like the top 50, but I wouldn't obsess between number 1 and number 7, because again, you could look at 10 different rankings and that would be flipped at every school.
After having done this work for over 20 years, what I would just say is that really what we do here at Top Tier is we help kids figure out the best school for them based on their interests. What academically does the school have that's a match to that student's scholarly interest, and how can they achieve, what they want to achieve in college at that particular school? Is the research opportunity there that they want to do? Is, if this is a kid who's very interested in 19th century art history, will they have a chance to do research their freshman year? Who's the professor they'd work with? It doesn't matter how the school's ranked. Really what happens is that students who come to us with, their list of schools they're interested in ninth grade, it's based on rankings because that's all they know. They don't know yet what they're really interested in. They haven't dug into schools with us yet to figure out what's a good match for them, for their learning style, for their interests, for their extracurricular interests. And so part of working with Top Tier is creating our own rankings for each student based on where they are, what schools are in range, and what schools have what that student is looking for. So as Michele said, rankings are just a moneymaker, and they're confusing, and they're not necessarily a marker of excellence in a particular area that a particular student is looking for.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this fireside chat. We're going to log off now. Any final words?
Nope. Thank you all for joining us. This is really fun. It's always fun for me and Michele to be able to talk to folks, and just urge you to go to our website, read our blog. Our counselors put a lot of time and effort into those blog posts, and we really try to pull back the veil for you and make things less stressful. So we are here to serve you and your students, and we look forward to having you as part of the Top Tier family.
And have a stress-free holiday.
Yes. Thank you, Tina.